Hello. How's everybody doing? All right, here's our agenda for today. I'm going to kick this thing off, and hopefully we're going to have a great discussion. We are super excited to have all of you here, and we graciously welcome you to the Data Plus Women event. So it's great to see so many people come out for this discussion. And I'm also personally excited to be able to sort of kick this off for today. We have an exciting panel of speakers, and we're thrilled to have you all engage in the discussion. This is also my first conference. I am new to Tableau, and I lead HR for the company. So it's an honor to be asked to sort of join this session. All right, so our mission is to help people see and understand data, and we're here also to see and understand. You know, that's exactly what this forum is all about, and it's super important to us. We really want to see and understand the people around us. We have a lot of diversity sitting here in this room. Also creating opportunities to have a strong experience, and also helping us share together as we're going through the discussion. We're super grateful for all of you for being part of this discussion. We're also grateful that you're choosing to make a commitment to share our values. And lastly, we encourage everyone to have an open mind as we kind of go through the discussions that we're going to have today. Hundreds of you, including those that aren't present today, are absolutely passionate about contributing their time to this community. And we're super, super grateful for that, and so very appreciative. People like Chloe and Britt are part of our community and make it come to life. They're going to help sort of explain to all of us the evolution of this forum and how it's come to be, and they're going to also sort of share in the conversations. So with that, let me introduce Britt and Chloe.
So whenever I started my career, I had so many questions in my mind. Why, when I look at the leadership position or technical position, there are always guys? Why people always come to me when they want to make their dashboard prettier, but they always go to my male counterpart when they have a technical question or coding question? Why my male counterpart has the exactly same opinion just like me, but people cannot hear my voice, only his voice. And I got really frustrated and really furious until I discovered this community, Data Plus Women community. Here, we have a bunch of amazing women. They're trying to change the dialogue and change the workplace and change the world because they firmly believe that we should be treated equally. We are badass, and we are as amazing as our male counterpart. So Bri and I are here really excited to show you some of the achievement from those amazing women we were able to achieve in the past 1 year. But before talking about those really exciting achievements, I want you to do a quick exercise with me. To pull up your phone, and using the hashtag #DataPlusWoman. This is a really important exercise. So use that hashtag every single time when you find a female speaker in Tableau conference, you find you get inspired. Historically, there are few women applicants applied to speak in the tech conference. Why? Simply because they feel they're not good enough, they're not ready to speak at the conference yet. But do you guys believe that? I don't believe that. So please use your superpower, use your voice, and use the hashtag #DataPlusWoman to be those female speakers' cheerleader and let them know how amazing they are. So now Bree is going to talk about the 4 amazing achievements that we were able to achieve in the last year.
Thank you, Chloe, and welcome everyone. It's really amazing to see how much this community has grown over the last 5 years. I think what started as perhaps a lunch of about 50 folks into an auditorium this size. So it's really great to see the engagement and the audience just participation grow and grow. So thank you so much for being here. But the Data Plus Women is not just an event that happens once a year at the conference. It's actually a community that's thriving throughout the year. So we really wanted to showcase some of the exciting things that happened this year. So did you know we actually host Data Plus Women virtual Tableau user groups? And at these sessions, we invite women from around the world to come and share their own initiatives, tips, and tricks for how they're really making change and impact with Data Plus Women. In March, we had women come on and talk about what they were doing to press for progress in honor of International Women's Day. And then this past summer, we dug deeper into the why and how of them creating their own initiatives, including Kira Wetzel, who is the founder of the nonprofit organization Girls Plus Data. She developed a data curriculum and is training the next generation of data rock stars.
Next, we're going to talk about sponsorship. I still need the mic. Thank you. I'm here. Sponsorship. So we are motivated. We want to learn. We want to grow. That's the reason why we come to Tableau conference. But this is a privilege. Not everyone has the same opportunity just like us can come to the conference because it's expensive. So this year, we really want to create more opportunity for women to come here to join the conversation, to join us. And we are really excited that Tableau started the Community Founder Award, and the She Talks Data, we started She Talks Data Grant. And there's so many people from this community, they're so generous, donate their money, donate their time, try to make women to come here. And we are really excited. We have 3 recipients for the grant and for the award. Christina, Mimi, and Naomi. If you guys are here, can you guys please stand up and let's give them a round of applause. It's so important to create opportunity for one woman, and we will keep doing that in the following conference and so on.
Definitely. It was also a very big year for IronViz. After Panelytics last year, the community got into a really important conversation about how we can make competitions like IronViz more inclusive. And coming from that conversation, Tableau actually created a survey and collected your feedback on how they can make it a more inclusive competition. So they implemented many changes, including releasing the schedule in advance and providing scores and feedback, among many others, and it's starting to pay off. In Europe, we actually saw the first female contestant in IronViz, Sarah Bartlett. And then, congratulations, Sarah. And in the US, the first feeder actually had 50% participation, and collectively all the feeders had more female participate than any of the previous competitions. Furthermore, Ann Jackson, over here, she's the only person to have placed in the top 10 in each round. So we really want to congratulate and honor all of the women who participated in the competition with a round of applause.
Lastly, we want to talk about leadership. We're so excited to see more and more women stand up, speak up for us, and to be the voice of women. So this year, we see a lot of women become the leader in this community. Heather and Amanda, they started a really amazing Data Plus Women chapter in Florida, try to build a community for women. And more importantly, this year, they try to take their initiative to the next level by starting the Women in Data Science Conference. So if you are around that area, please support them and to join the conversation with them. Next, I want to talk about the amazing Lindsay. She has a vision. She wants to use data visualization to increase the awareness about healthcare. So she started a really amazing project called Project Health Viz. So through the project, she was able to encourage more people using the power of visualization to increase awareness and let people understand the healthcare issue around the world. So let's also give a round of applause for those amazing leaders in this community.
So with that, I'm sure you're all excited to kick off today's event. Our discussion today is going to be focused on bias, what it is, how it impacts us, and what we can do about it. And with that, I'd like to introduce 4-time Zen Master, 2012 Iron Viz champ, and founder of Data Blick, Anya Ahern, to set the context for today's discussion.
Ooh, where's the clicker? Oh, you got it. Sweet. Hi. Oh, they already did my intro, so we can skip that. I would like to start off this session with a riddle, and I would like everyone to stand up, please. Little audience participant, get up, get up, get up. End of the day, stretch. And if you've heard the riddle before, I'm going to ask you to sit down. And if, as we call your answer, what? Oh. And if we call out different answers, if we call out your answer, sit down as well. So here is the riddle. A father and son are in a horrible car crash that kills the dad. The son is rushed to the hospital, and just as he's about to go under the knife, the surgeon says, "I can't operate. That boy is my son." If your answer was, the father didn't really die, sit down. If it was, the surgeon, oh, look at that spot typo. The surgeon is the boy's stepfather, have a sit down. The surgeon is the boy's adopted father, have a sit down. Maybe you're from San Francisco, the boy had 2 fathers. And the final conclusion that less than 14% of people come to is that the surgeon was the boy's mom. So this was part of a study on gender stereotypes, and less than 14%, so a lot of you were standing, thank you, woo, because you did way better. That was way more than 14%. And they attribute people not being able to come to this very obvious conclusion to implicit bias. And here to help us explain a little bit more about implicit bias is Conan O'Brien.
About the Boy Scouts. This is a big story. Last week, the organization decided to allow girls to join, and they officially changed their name to just Scouts. Yeah. Cool. Now, of course, a lot of people have opinions about this, and they're wondering if making the organization co-ed is a good idea. We haven't talked about it yet. What do you think, Andy?
Well, I don't want to sway anyone's opinion, but I did get my hands on some footage from the co-ed scout camp. I think a lot of you will find it very troubling. Take a look.
What the? Which one of you did this?
Hi, I'm Andy Richter, and I'm here to talk to you about implicit bias. If you watched that clip and assumed the owner of the curling iron would be a girl, then you just showed implicit bias. Something to think about. Okay, I think we got it. Let's give it up for my camera operator, Sam.
Thanks, Andy.
Hi, me again. And if you assume my camera operator, Sam, was a man, you've once again shown implicit bias. Check your bias. Okay, guys, we're really done now. I have to take my car to the mechanic. Yes! My mechanic is a woman. Damn it, people. This is exhausting. I'm spending the rest of my day fighting against gender inequality.
Woo! All right. So, it's a very good explanation. Why do people have this bias? And Daniel Kahneman, the famous psychologist and Nobel Prize winning in economics, created a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and in it he describes the 2 systems of the brain for thinking. Our brain is bombarded with 11 million bits of information at any given time, and we can only handle about 40. And so our brain creates these shortcuts in order to be able to process and deal with all these different bits of information. And so the system 1 brain is very fast, but it's very error prone. And the reactions or the judgments that come out of system 1 are what tends to lead to the implicit bias. Your brain creates these mental shortcuts based on your experiences in the past, your culture, and it calls upon this data repository in order to make these rapid fire decisions. And here are some of the common examples of implicit bias that are found in HR. Now, they say that the average person in HR takes about 6 seconds to put a resume on the yes or the no pile. And so these are examples that can make or break you based on things like affinity bias. Oh, the person went to my alma mater, they went to my college, therefore they're in the yes pile. Or something like the horns effect. Someone had interesting hair or tattoos, so they're instantly a no. Okay. We actually showed this slide in the TC Europe, and we decided to turn this into a drinking game. So if you're out at data night out, and you see me, for instance, talking to a 6'1" pasty white German, you can say, Anya, that's affinity bias, and you have a boyfriend, stop it. All right, and you might go, well, I'm not subject to bias, and I'm here to show you, even a tree-hugging hippie, that's me in Yosemite, actually hugging a tree, carrying the Tableau torch, and wearing my Alteryx for Good t-shirt that I tie-dyed. Even tree-hugging hippies are affected by implicit bias. And here's one example. I have a son and a daughter, and my son, when he was 5 years old, wanted to go see Iron Man. And I was like, yes, finally I get to go see a cool action movie, and this is perfect, a superhero movie for my boy, and it's not Thomas Train, this is awesome. Well, 7 years later, when my daughter turned 5 years old, Wonder Woman came out, and my instant reaction was like, oh my God, that's too violent for my little girl. So even I have this repository that I'm calling on that leads me to do things that I might not be consciously aware of until I stop and slow down and use that system 2 brain to actually think about what this response meant. Okay. And here are my 2 children at age 5, and I look back and I say, well, Veronica, she's had a brother that's 7 years older. She is far more exposed to all these different mature contents, and so in reality, I should have been far more prepared for her to be able to go see Wonder Woman. Okay. So I was curious. Well, how much bias do I really have? And there's a very good website from Harvard, and you can go on and you can take various different implicit bias tests for race or gender, and it has you sort things into piles that are associated with categories male or female in this case. And the dirty, dirty shame, I showed moderate bias. Okay, so the point is everyone is subject to implicit bias. And this comes often from just our cultural environment, the way we were brought up. Now, there was an artist that created a project called the Pink and Blue Project, and she asked children to bring everything in their room out into the open and photograph the children with their objects. And we can see at a very early age, we tend to shove boys and girls in these boxes. Okay? So I wanted to look at data. We're here at a data conference. So I spent a day cataloging every single product that I used, and I rendered it in Tableau. And then I decided to dissect that data and break it up into things that I considered wants versus things that I considered needs. I then further sliced and diced the data by looking at things I considered to be female-specific versus gender-neutral. And I quickly discovered that things that I considered wants were things that I associated with being female-specific. Things like lipstick or hairspray or the curling iron. And it kind of angers me, right? Here I am spending more money, spending more time. I calculated if I spend about 30 minutes in the morning with my hair and my makeup and picking out my clothes, over a lifetime of 60 years, that's 10,000 hours that I have spent working on creating a vision of what I feel I should look like in order to be presentable. And yet, even faced with this data looking right at me, it's my data, I don't think that I will change. Right? So my system 2 brain is kicking in here, and it's just so ingrained in me, it will take a lot of conscious effort to actually work to overcome this. Okay? Now, this happens a lot of times, and it translates into the way that we're perceived within the community. And this is very sweet, Matt Francis. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. He was doing a podcast with Jonathan Drummey, who's on the panel later, and myself. And we were at TC Europe, and when it came time to introduce Jonathan, Jonathan was the Zen Grand Master, Hall of Fame inductee. Jonathan was introduced based on his technical merits and prowess. And when it came time to introduce me, who is also a Zen Master, who's also done other things, Jonathan actually worked for DataBlick, I was introduced as the wonderful awesomeness that is Anya Ahern. And I looked remarkably okay after 3 days. Well, what's wrong? So this is what I call just a micro inequity. And so it's not a big thing, but it does lead to this kind of death by 1,000 cuts. Here I am being introduced to my technical peers in an environment where the male is being introduced on his technical merit, and I'm being introduced on glitter. And this doesn't just affect me, because I am pretty glittery. But here's an example. It was a survey done of over 80,000 performance reviews in the military. And it's looking at the different words that were used to describe men and women in both a positive and negative way. And the words are so different. In particular, the volume of words that are in the negative pile when it comes to women. And you might say, what's wrong with that? It's great to be compassionate, but when you're looking at dollars and cents from a business context, the value of someone who is analytical is potentially more valuable to a company than compassionate. And unfortunately, this leads to bigger inequalities. This was kind of a tongue-in-cheek index called the Glass Ceiling Index that was created by Ernst & Young. And they looked at the ratio of men with only the 4 names, John, Robert, William, or James, versus women with any name. And they discovered that on the corporate boards for the S&P 1500 top companies, that there was the index of 1.03 John, Robert, Williams, or Jameses versus all women, just those 4 names. And so the New York Times took that further, and they expanded this glass ceiling index to look at CEOs, people in politics, and also versus the US population, which is only 0.12 John Williams, Roberts, and Jameses. Okay. Uh-oh, I hit the wrong button. All right, cool. So do you act more like a man? Right? So women are expected to be compassionate, they're expected to be caring, and the converse is if you do act like a man, then you're perceived as being a cold, hard. They made me edit the slide. I actually had All right, but one of the things I like about the industry that we're in is that hopefully data can be the great equalizer. We can use data to hopefully even out the playing field. And one of my favorite stories of working in data was when I was pregnant with my son Max, about 7 months pregnant. I was a program manager for launching a data analytics platform for a very large transaction processor. And we had developed an analytics solution for a very large US military organization. And we were looking at trying to find people using their credit cards for nefarious purposes, so their government-issued credit cards for naughty things. And we showed up at this meeting to demonstrate the capabilities of this tool. And I'd helped kind of take coats and make coffee just because it was the polite thing to do. And we go to start the meeting, and this older gentleman looked at me as I walked to the front of the room and said, "Oh, you get your girl to run your PowerPoints." And I was like, 7 months pregnant, I'm bringing all the woman I can get. But before the meeting, I had actually researched everyone's transactions. And so as the meeting progressed and we showed the various reports, he at one point said, "How do I know that you can really find all this fraud?" To which I replied, "What were you doing last Tuesday at Caesar's Palace for $173.87? Okay, data can be the great equalizer, which is why I'm so excited to be in this field. Okay, now what's the converse, right? If we don't look at it, there's the flexibility stigma. And this is actually a picture of Noah right there. Noah Salvatore, he's a data blicker, and one of the reasons he came to work to Data Blick was that we have a very flexible work schedule. I started the company because I wanted to be able to have a good work-life balance. And research studies show that men that do spend more time with their children and take paternal leave have better bonds with their children, are healthier, and actually in Sweden and Norway, a study just came out that they live longer. So men, it's in your best interest, if you want to have these things, to make sure they're available for men too. And currently, men that do take time off are passed over for promotions, they don't get pay raises, they're treated like women. Okay? Another reason you might want to include diversity is epic product failure. If you don't consider a diverse consumer base, things like this could happen. This is called the racist soap dispenser. Works fine, nothing. Yeah. Or there was an example of the camera that didn't recognize eyes of a certain shape and said, "Oh, did you blink?" right? So having a diverse team ensures that you're able to cater to and provide products for a diverse client base. And that's very important. Here is a slide from Hans Rosling's book, Factfulness. And bias leads us to have this conception of things of us versus them, East versus West, developed versus developing. And that's all great, but this is a slide from the 60s, and it looks more like this in the current day and age. And so when you don't consider these people to have buying power or consider them as being consumers because you've dismissed them as being the them, you lose out on 5 billion customers that you could potentially be selling your products to. So bias is keeping you from actually making profit. Okay, and there was a study done by McKinsey. This is probably the most prominent study, and it just shows, it's looking at the top boards by diversity versus the bottom boards by diversity across several countries. And there's just an increase in ROE and on EBIT for those that have highly diverse boards. So it just makes financial sense. Okay? And diverse companies, they tend to believe you have a broader talent pool to choose from, right? You're including all applicants in your search process, so therefore you are likely to find the best candidates. You can improve customer orientation, as we just saw with the hand dispenser and the camera. By having an inclusive team in your product development, you're probably able to address the needs of all of your clients. Employees are happier. You have improved decision making. And of course, it all just leads to more money. So even if you still want to be a douchebag, you can do it for the dollars. So some of the ways to advocate change in your organization, it's okay, be honest with yourself. It's a normal brain function that you have implicit bias. It's just something that your brain does to cope with making all of these decisions. But you can take the time to slow down and use your system two thinking. And take the time, instead of just honing in on one thing, consider the person as an individual. And also, especially in HR situations, potentially take the opinions of the entire group into consideration. Don't just go with your gut feeling. Okay? And then change your outlook. Just go about it. Like I said tonight, I made fun of it with the drinking game, but go out, and if something comes out of your mouth, check yourself and just go, okay, I'm aware of that. I'm going to slow down next time and try and keep that from happening again. And just try to increase everyone's awareness of equality and diversity by helping to host and coordinate events like this. And I had one last story. This is my daughter, Veronica. And we were driving to school, like right before the conference. I was dropping her off. And you have that kind of babble that you just talk about in the morning when you're trying to get to work. And she's like, Mommy, are there going to be self-driving cars when I'm a grown-up? I'm like, oh, yeah, that's already a thing. And she's like, what about flying cars? And I said, well, there's probably going to be a limitation on trying to get the radar so they can control the cars at different height. And I'm just going on and on with my system 2 babble. And she just stops me dead in the tracks and goes, well, Mom, what if I invent them? Right? And so when you get smacked in the face with those moments of, oh my God, why did I not think of that? Why did I not have faith in the power in this girl? When you think of moments like that, take them, find delight, and find that it's an opportunity to make sure that the pink box that this girl grows up in isn't even there, and that our system 1 thinking is all pointed to a data repository where none of this exists. Okay? Thank you.
I can introduce myself. Hi, my name is Ashley Oman, and I am so thrilled to see everyone here today. Thank you so much for joining us. As you heard from Anya, bias is inherent to our survival as a human species. But there's something else that's really important, and that's altruism. And each of our panelists is here today in order to share with you insights from their personal experiences so that we may all form better and stronger connections and create more opportunities to succeed together. So, let's start off with our panel. I'm going to call up each person. We'd like to hold our applause for after the introductions and then hope that you'll give them a very warm welcome. We're going to start off with Catherine Boychuk, who is one of our customers. Catherine is the CEO of Telstra, which is a rather large telecom, and she is here from Australia. We're super grateful to have her here. You can find her on Twitter. We've included everyone's handle, and we've actually created a lot of resources online as well. Catherine moderated a panel in her office a few weeks ago. It's on the internet, and it's really fantastic. I encourage you to watch it. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Ruta Bay Kishi. Ruta Bay is the Director of Research at ACLED, and she is here from Wisconsin. She and her team have also been involved with Tableau in Europe, where they've participated in similar panels. And Amy Forstrom, our very own, a manager of product management at Tableau here from Seattle. It's been an absolute delight getting to know her, and we'll be joining next to Amy Chantilly Jaggernath, who is very prominent in our community. She's the CEO of Millennials Plus Data and also a customer. And Mr. Jonathan Drummy, Zen Master Hall of Fame and a data visualization specialist at Path. Please welcome our panelists today. We welcome you all to tweet if you'd like during the panel questions. Feel free to react. A couple of things that I would like to say about our panel is we respect everyone's opinion, and the purpose of this panel is to build connections rather than divisions. So we appreciate your respect of our panelists and look forward to getting your thoughts on these topics as well. So we're going to start off. I have my very fancy iPhone instead of cue cards to use, so if I'm doing this, that's all it is. And what we're going to do is foster a conversation. This is about connections, and we're here to talk and share and get to know each other better. We also want to legitimize the reactions and experiences that you all are having here as well. We're going to start off with some questions that will help you get to know our panelists a little bit better. I'm actually going to start off with Catherine. It's very convenient that she's right here. I was able to spend some time with her on the phone a couple of weeks ago and have been very intrigued to learn about her experiences as a woman in technology, and would love to find out what you think has been critical to your success as a woman in technology.
Well, first, are we going? Yes. I don't normally need a microphone. This is rather odd. Greetings from Down Under. I've been in technology now for 19 years. I know it's hard to believe by looking at me. The thing about working in technology is that you have the opportunity to be a creative leader. And whether you're male or female, it's kind of irrelevant. We all have the same intellectual horsepower under the hood. And so for me, what I've learned through my career is that the more that I was myself, the more I progressed and accelerated in my career. So the years that I spent wearing suits and high heels was a complete waste of time. The more time I spent trying to please people and caring about what other people thought of me, the less I progressed and accelerated amazing things. I kind of was working on mundane things or things that had to get done. And so for me, I really, about 10 years ago, really shifted gears and started focusing on what was the legacy that I wanted to leave behind. And when you think about the legacy that you want to leave behind, for me, I didn't want my headstone or obituary to say she was really good at responding to emails on time. And I wanted to think bigger and create something that my kids will be proud of and say, you know, my mum did that. And so what I would say is think about what legacy you want to leave behind. 2, focus your time and really look at prioritising your time, 80% of your time, on doing the stuff that matters. Because the noise and the stuff that keeps you up at night, genuinely in 12 months' time you won't remember it. But you will remember the things that brought you joy, the things that were connected to your purpose and the things that you wanted to leave behind on this planet. So I encourage you to be brave and really, really prioritise, and selfish, prioritise your time, and amazing things happen. And please just dress comfortably.
Ruta?
So when this question first came up, I was thinking about myself as a woman in data, and it's weird because I don't really think of myself that way, in that I I don't have a background in data science specifically. I mean, I'm a political scientist and I study political violence, and data is the tool I use to answer the questions that I have. So I've kind of been, navigating this new world of data, and I feel like we're increasingly in this world where data is permeating these other fields that we're not just data, so to speak. We no longer have just one data person at an organization. Increasingly, we have entire organizations that are built around data, which is where I work. So I think it's important to start thinking about being in the data world in that way, and that you don't have to be a data person, so to speak, to find yourself in this world in 2018. So hopefully some of you identify with kind of feeling this imposter syndrome of being here, but you're not alone.
I'm trying to remember what the question is.
Yeah, happy to. And you and I have talked about this. What do you think has been critical to your success in your career in data?
Okay, yeah, I remember now talking about this. So, I did kind of go through the list of, passion and perseverance and all those things. And, then I thought, well, what's really been critical to my success was really about luck and about being born in the 70s in the United States and being raised in the Pacific Northwest, in Seattle and a tech hub and that whole thing. And then what I realized what was really critical, 2 or 3 days after I started thinking about the question was actually a woman named Jane Ginn. And right after college, I got a degree in chemistry, and I knew I did not want to be a chemist because I'm the biggest klutz, and I really don't like lab, and why would I get that degree anyway? That's another story. But I had taken a couple of computer classes in college, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed getting to solve problems, and so I took 9 months more of classes, and I ended up, through that, meeting a woman named Jane Ginn, who, right after the dot bomb happened, and everyone in the tech sector was losing jobs, Jane helped me get a tech job. She believed in me, and she made a connection, and through her, I started my career in tech and eventually found my way to focus on data. So I guess, I want to say thank you, Jane. I don't know if she'll ever see this, but, I hope we can all be Jane for someone.
I'm glad that Amy asked to repeat the question because that was probably going to be my follow-up. Can we get the question again? But also there are 3 things that have really gotten me to this point in my career. 1, being a rebel, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. 2, being authentic, and then 3, being caring and passionate. So I'm the rebel of my family. I pretty much do everything that everyone tells me not to do, which has turned out to be pretty good at this point. And I keep that in my career as well. So I don't take no for an answer. And if there's something that I can't do that someone won't let me do, I'll find a way to do it probably outside of my 9 to 5 so that I'm not being reprimanded on my job. But I look for those opportunities to create change and do the things that I'm really passionate about. So that's that rebel spirit that I keep with me. 2, being authentic. So I am my authentic self all of the time. I'm goofy, I'm funny. I keep that going. I work in corporate America, and sometimes they tell you to calm that down a little bit, calm your spirits down, act more corporate-y, whatever that is. But I'm always goofy, I'm always lighthearted, and I keep that with me wherever I go. I'm very authentic. And then 3, being passionate and caring. I found that at this point, one thing that has gotten me really to this point is that I care about people, and I'm really passionate about what I do. So keeping that human aspect of your job will take you really far as well. Talking to people and talking about their day and their past. Everybody has a story as well. So understanding and making that connection with people first before you get into the business side of things, I found that to be really helpful as well.
That was awesome. For me, I was going to be one to ask to repeat the question. So I think the biggest thing for me in thinking about it, because I'm on like, if I sort of label my career, I'm kind of in a third phase of it, which may be the last one. I work on this awesome project, Visualize No Malaria. It's going to take us probably worldwide another 12, 13, 14 years to eliminate malaria around the world, and by then I might be ready to retire. So, but that would be kind of an awesome end to a career. Yeah. And a piece for me in this, for me has been this, I lucked out, like Amy, just in how I was as a child and everything, that I grew up with an attitude of service. And for me, in figuring out, the work was kind of in that sort of second phase to figure out what that service was for me. Like not just kind of doing what I thought was right or the right way to dress or stuff like that, and do that, but like, okay, what is the truest expression of me in the world and how do I help other people? And with that, having this belief that the more we give, that we're gonna, like, the getting back will be there, it'll take care of itself, but in helping others. So for me, I am where I am on this stage in Tableau because I wrote blog posts and presented at user groups, and when somebody emailed me for help, I said, sure, I'll try to help you, and lift people up. So one of my teachers, she told me from one of her teachers, a good teacher is like a forklift. So we're not going to have you do everything, but we're just going to help you over the humps in things. So having that attitude for me has been the biggest thing, and just being of service and knowing that, and in that having that humility of I don't have all the answers. As much as I'm helping other people, it's that other people have helped me in doing that.
Thank you. There's a topic that has been prominent in public discussions lately, and that is the role of women in executive leadership roles in technology organizations. And more specifically on boards of directors, which, as we saw with Uber a little over a year ago, really wield a lot of influence in the culture of an organization. And California now has passed a law requiring women to be on the boards of publicly held companies. I'd like to get your reactions to this. Feel free to take the mic and share as you have something that you'd like to contribute.
I feel a couple different ways about this. And, you know, I see, specifically referring to the California law, and I definitely see the value in sort of maybe forcing or mandating or requiring is probably the right word, that boards have sufficient representation from women. And so on one hand, I get that, and if I'm really honest though, I have to say also that another part of me really doesn't like it because my partner has founded her own company, and I want her to get to choose who's on her board because it's her company. And so it feels in some ways like, yeah, maybe I'll just stop there and let someone else share.
And the opposing argument, no. You can't be what you can't see. And so in Australia, I am one of the 7% of women in Australia hold roles in the C-suite and above. I'm fortunate to work for a male champion, Andy Penn, and 50% of our senior leadership team is female. Our current chairperson is a male, but before him we had the very brilliant Catherine Livingston. And diversity is something that is not just a numbers game. There's a difference between diversity and inclusion. And so diversity is this thing that we talk about the maths, and we talk about targets, and we talk about merit-based hiring. And then there's a conversation which is, well, what's inclusion then? Well, inclusion's about doing something that actually makes a difference, that has an impact. And so I think that it's brilliant that it's mandated, because the reality is that when our kids are opening the Wall Street Journal and the Fin Review in Australia, and they see page after page after page of men, they don't dream to be in the paper, and they should. And so for me, I think that everyone wants to be hired based on their talents and their own special genius, but at the same time, sometimes you just need to put your foot in the door to keep it open. So I say bring it on, and congratulations for the legislation change.
So I'll actually add something. I kind of find myself in between these two, very literally. I mean, it's obviously great, I think, having women being put on these boards, being given these opportunities to see. I mean, we have these conversations now about diversity and inclusion. So many of these seem like check boxes, right? And I think what it's really about is representation, is seeing, when you flip through the newspaper, seeing someone that looks like you, thinking that you don't have to be named John or Tom or whatever to be on a board or be in charge of something. But I think what's also really crucial is that we can't just say, mission accomplished, women are on boards now, they're half the board, things are solved. What we really need to think about is that the system has to change, right? Because otherwise you end up with having yes men or yes women, quite literally, or like the women who might just corroborate the ideas that men are saying on these boards. We see this a lot in, going back to politics, just because that's my background. There's an increase in gender quotas, for example, and mandating certain numbers of women holding certain numbers of political seats in parliaments, things like that, which is really welcome towards inclusion and really an important step. But without offering the kind of support or the systemic changes, all it's doing is shoving women into this public sphere where they don't have the support system to be able to stand up for these things that they want. So you're seeing women being targeted, and I think that you might end up with the same thing with these board seats, where if women don't have a position to be able to actually advocate for the things that they want, if they just have a seat at the board but they're continually being voted against, then what's the point of having these women on boards? I think it's a much larger question.
Hello? Yeah. So when you brought up the question, Ashley, there's a piece I was thinking about because of the slide of Hans Rosling's book that Anya brought up, Factfulness, which is this amazing book talking about bias and cognitive biases and cultural biases and things that we have. So it's a fantastic read for everybody who works with data, or if you are in a position where you're trying to use data to convince people to take action, which is basically all of us. It's an awesome book. And so I work with various global indicators and things like that pretty regularly. And one of the things there, when we look at the United States, so I figure most of us are from the United States, countries where they do mandate more equality, like Sweden, Finland, those northern countries, tend to kick our ass on a number of indicators. And I think there's, in my view, there's a correlation between that the more equal society is having better health outcomes and longer lives and all these great things for people. So in that way, California pushing that as an act of government, which is an act of our collective will as citizens of the government, let's see what happens with that.
I would add to it. I absolutely love the mandate. I feel like the millennial generation in particular, we start to look at those aspects when we're trying to decide if we want to work for a company or not. I know that in my case in particular, it's a lot to say you're pushing diversity, but then it's another thing to say, what does your actual board look like at this point? Your community might look like it, but now I'm going to the board level. What does your board look like? What does your C-suite look like? And there have been job opportunities that I've turned down because I do not see the diversity at that level. So it's starting to become a thing, I know, amongst millennials to say, what's your board look like? What does gender look like on your board? Not just your employee population.
Thank you. Now that we've talked a little bit about the value of having a mandate and some of the challenges that exist between a mandate itself or desire to make change and then actually impacting the change, what have you all seen work well in organizations or in other social groups of which you're part when there is a desire to have a change, whether it's greater diversity or inclusion? What works? How do leaders affect change?
I can speak to that. So I think it kind of, feeds very much off of the discussion about, the California mandate and how, it's not mission accomplished just because you have women at the table, so to speak. I think when it comes to organizations as well, you can, a great first step is in hiring, more women and expanding the pool you look at when you're hiring, et cetera. But just hiring women your job isn't done. I think that so many times you hire women and then conversations are still dominated by men inside of meetings, inside of projects, things like that. And I think that what I have seen work well and what I really try to support is that when we do hire women, making space for them to be able to speak up at meetings or lead projects or creating those kinds of opportunities so that they do feel like I deserve to be here, I have a legitimate voice. We need to foster those kinds of situations, I think.
I think there's kind of two threads of thought here. The first, as an individual, we all have our own wallets and we have a choice about where we spend our money. And so the first thing I would say is spend your money with organisations that have a diversity moonshot, a declared commitment out in the market. That's what each of us can do as individuals and show our support for organisations that do that. In Australia, there's probably two really notable stories. I think first, Telstra, the company I work for, we have kind of 3 declared moonshots in the market. So the first is that all roles are flexible, and you have to complete a business case if you want to create a job that's not flexible. So the inverse of effort is required for all employees, and that treats everyone equally. The second is that we have 50-50 hiring policies in place. So for every male you interview, you have to interview a woman. For every male that makes a shortlist for a role, there has to be a female. So there's absolute again, you also need to fill in a business case as to why you're not going to follow that policy. I think we've had maybe 2, kind of get through the business case and to be a reasonable reason as to why they couldn't achieve diversity on those 2 fronts. So have a moonshot. I think we've also kind of had a really great example with Qantas. So Qantas is an Australian airline, very old airline. Very fun fact, 3% of the world's pilots are women. 5% of senior pilots are women. Alan Joyce, the CEO of Qantas in November last year, came out and declared that Qantas will be at 50% of roles in their organisation will be women within the next decade. If there was ever a guy working off a really low base and had a really big challenge to overcome, Alan Joyce is that guy, and he's like, I'm not having it. So he's made a public commitment, a moonshot out in the market. 20% of their graduates this year into their pilot program will be women. They are now creating pilot schools and going into high schools to reverse engineer that gender parity around pilots. And let's be honest, who doesn't want a woman flying a plane that they're on? So I just think that you can give enough reasonable excuses, and I just think that they're just that excuses. And so, you know, think about the company you work for. Do they have a moonshot? And if they don't, maybe start a conversation about getting a moonshot commitment out in the market.
There's a lot of different answers to that question. I think, because we can talk about the hiring process or we can talk about working at the company or things like that. So I want to talk to the guys in the room for a second, like, because there's stuff that we can do to help this, and it's not going to happen unless it's all of us working on this. And one of the things for me in thinking about it more, that I got some really good lessons from my wife in, because I'd be having a conversation with somebody and she'd be going like this, and I'd be like, what are you doing? And she'd be going like this and everything. And I'd be thinking I'd having a conversation with somebody and she'd point out I was monopolizing the conversation. So what I thought was a conversation was more of a one-way me telling somebody else than a two-way interaction. So nowadays we have the term mansplaining for that, and I've definitely been guilty of it. Anybody else? Anybody willing to raise their hand? Yeah, cool. Thank you. Thank you, everybody who's willing to do it. Those of you who haven't, maybe next year you can be raising your hand. Yeah. But with that, this place of just, I mean, this is also where we're data people. Like, this has been some of my angle into some of this learning, is just thinking about it as data points. And there's this data point of how long are people talking in a meeting? Who's talking in the meeting and how long are they talking? And if somebody's not talking in the meeting, maybe they don't have anything to say, or maybe they don't feel able to say something. And I can solicit that voice and get that diversity of thought and thinking that will prevent things like the racist soap dispenser, that somebody can think about that. So that's something that we as men can do, is pay attention. How much are we saying in conversation? How much are the other people saying in the conversation? And look at that and try to bring that towards something that's more equal and more relevant to everybody.
One of my favorite TED Talks is by Susan David, who is a doctor of psychology at Harvard, and she wrote a great book on emotional agility. And the quote is that discomfort is the price of entry to a rich and meaningful life. And the reality of some of these conversations is that they can make us feel uncomfortable. That discomfort also is a great doorway to learning. And I'd like to come back to bias for a moment. And I'm curious, for each of you, when you have encountered bias in your career, either as the recipient of it or in some cases, as each of us has in the course of the day, as expressing a biased view, what would you do differently knowing what you know now? How would you use your knowledge and your platform to change conversations going forward when bias is a factor?
I feel like I'm supposed to answer because I have the mic. A couple questions in there, like how have I been affected by bias, and then, you know, or how have I demonstrated bias and what would I do differently? You know, I have some pretty terrible bias around, I'll be honest, women being emotional. And I can't believe I'm saying this, so please, like, don't beat me up after. But, you know, it's true, and thank you, Anya, for creating an environment where, you know, I can say that, right? Like, my automatic lizard brain, you know, really beats myself up. It's not normally about others, but really about myself, for being, having emotions. And in the workplace especially, and being around a lot of logical people who like linear arguments and stuff like that, man, sometimes I just can really get going. So what I first of all, I want to, again, you know, say that I don't believe that. It's just automatically there for me when I am feeling emotional. And what I would want to do differently is just be more present and include my experience as a human being, you know, it turns out human beings have emotions, and it doesn't really have to do with like anything except that I'm breathing, and that's okay.
Hold on. Alrighty, there we go. I've experienced bias towards my age a lot. And that's one main thing that I've had to overcome. So I've always been the youngest person in the room. So not only am I young, I'm a woman, and I'm a person of color. So it's like, I don't want to say there are like 3 targets on my back, but sometimes that's what it feels like when I'm in these meetings. And I would say it comes from sometimes the older generation sometimes thinking that a young individual doesn't know more than them, when in all actuality, sometimes we may know a little bit more than you in a particular area and can help you with that. And you can help us with certain things too. So I've experienced bias in that area. And I would say that for any managers and leaders of the younger generation, take time to know that person. So there's always this bias that sometimes a young person comes into the org and they're looking to take their job, right? That's not always the case. If you have a conversation with me, you will know that I don't want to be in corporate America forever. I give myself maybe 2 to 3 more years in it, and then I'm out the door. But you wouldn't know that unless you took the time, going back to that caring aspect of knowing your people, to actually get to know the millennial that you're working with or the person that you're working with and understanding what they're doing and how you can foster their growth as a person. So that would just be my recommendation, and then the stuff that I've ran into so far.
Hello. I definitely identify. I was going to say basically the same things about like being a woman, but we have so many conversations that are like data and women, as if like it affects all women in the same way. And it doesn't, because some of us have multiple targets on our back. And I think that, you know, sometimes it compounds it. And I mean, it has taken me a long time to get to the point where, like, how am I going? I get about 100% of emails from strangers to the research director of ACLED, to someone named Rutabe, come to Mr. Kishi, 100% of the time. And I remember the first few times I would look up, like, what's the official etiquette that you're supposed to deal with this? And I think that some of the old-fashioned, one of those like etiquette books or whatever, suggests that you're supposed to like very discreetly add Ms. next to your signature so that it like becomes clear and doesn't rub anyone the wrong way. But I mean, and I was like, oh, I could do that. But then I thought, I'm not Ms., I'm doctor. I'm not about to put that down to like help you figure out who I am. And so I've just taken it to just write, P.S. I'm a woman. Like, and people seem to respond to it. Usually people will come back like, oh goodness, sorry, like, you know, and then they think twice maybe the next time before just pulling the trigger on a mister to like the next person in charge. So maybe just try that on for size if you feel like you're doing that.
Chantilly and Rutabe both brought up, I think, pretty good topics around having conversations with the people around us about truly understanding. How do you do that? What do those conversations look like? And how will you, as leaders, help the people coming up after you build the skills they need to help others grow in their careers?
I think that kind of this question and the previous question, I think there's no bad men and we don't need to fix women. I think that we all you know, go to work every day with the intention of rocking it. And so we're not who we are in our worst moment, and we're not who we are in our best moment. We're actually somewhere in the middle. And so I find the best piece of advice and the biggest piece of advice that I give people that work with me, those lucky people, that when you are in a meeting with someone or there is a task that you're trying to achieve and you just run into someone that's really difficult, they're the people you need to spend time with. The people that you want to avoid the most are the people you need to spend the most time with because they think differently to you. And if you take the time to get to know them, you not only learn about how do you find that point of intersection, that you can both move forward and create a successful outcome for each other, that you actually grow as a human being as well. And so I think that there's no such thing as a win-loss meeting, or I need to get this out of this meeting, or I'm going to win this negotiation, but how do you actually just create win-win moments? And quite often the gifts and the learning come from the really difficult people that you don't want to work with or meet with or you want to avoid. And so take note when you're doing that. Take note when you don't want to email that person or ring that person or ever see that person again, because possibly you need to pick up the phone and invite them out for coffee. And that's how you get through one difficult conversation at a time. And they may not even realise that you kind of are a bit annoyed by being in their space, but at the end of it, you will be a better human being for it.
I would say, sometimes it is a little difficult to have that conversation, especially with one of your leaders. But if you're in a situation where it's difficult like that, be the one to create the change. And that's exactly what I did in founding Millennials in Data. I found it difficult to sometimes have those conversations higher up, but I wanted to make sure that my voice was heard some way. So I started a community of millennials in data where we're all diverse. All of our students are diverse. They're all students of color. And we're split 50-50, so we have 5 students that are women and 5 students that are men, all from diverse backgrounds, all diverse in thought, diverse in color, diverse in gender as well. And that's because I found it hard to have that conversation, but I knew that I was in the influence stage of my success, and I wanted to make sure that I was doing something in my community as well, not just taking no for an answer or not just stopping at being unable to talk to someone about it, but just taking action on it in your own way.
Thanks. One thing for me is a difficult conversation is a difficult conversation, and just being honest about it is one of the best things we can do. And that's, here we are at this Tableau conference, tomorrow is Devs on Stage, and one of the reasons why Devs on Stage is so fantastic is because it's real developers up there. So there aren't people who necessarily have spent their whole lives polishing how to be a public speaker and be up there. They're real people who are sharing, and in the moment they might get a little hung up just staring at the audience, looking at people. Or things like that. So with that, in that vein, if we're as leaders and we need to talk to people and get to know them and things like that, and a part of it is just owning up, like, I want to know more about you, and I know this is a little weird because we're not talking about the regular stuff, and also in ourselves being vulnerable. So Brene Brown has some awesome TED Talks about that. Just about being vulnerable ourselves and not just wearing that perfect working person shell, but injecting some realness into the world. So if I'm not at 100% because my allergies have me down, I'm letting people know about that it's like my brain's not able to think it the way it is, and they're okay with that. And then we just move on and we both deal with it together in that moment. So, so taking that time to be vulnerable and acknowledge the difficulties that are there and be honest about them.
So what are the conversations that we should be having in community events like this that we're not?
So my wife called me last week, and I didn't know I was going to say this. So I'm angry and upset. I'm upset about this, But my wife, we live in a mill town, an old mill town, and so she needs to walk about 3 blocks. And it's 9:30 at night, and she feels like she needs to call me, and so that way she's talking to me on the cell phone just to walk the 2 or 3 blocks back to our apartment. And that this strong, amazing, powerful woman has this worry about being a victim of violence perpetrated by a man. That's a conversation we don't have enough, because so many women have been subject to violence by men. And we saw that in the news in the last few weeks with the Supreme Court justice, and that whole space of how many women were really upset and how many men just didn't get it. So this place of men not getting it, we got to work on that. In a lot of ways, it's going to be up to us men to point that out, to change that.
Hey, I just want to take a moment to honour your contribution just then. I just think that took such courage and vulnerability. Thank you for giving us that gift of that comment. In Australia, a woman is murdered a week by someone that she knows. And we invest more money in fighting terrorism, and I think 7 people have died from terrorism, and work out how many weeks there are in a year. It is an epidemic. I think the other conversation I just want to put out there in this room is that I want this conversation to be redundant. I don't want to come to these conferences and have women in data or women in technology or women in anything, except for a really cool social event at some point during the conference. And so, sorry men, we do drink with you too, it's Wednesday night. And the reason why I want to say this is that I am raising 3 amazing daughters, and I do not want this conversation to still be a thing when they enter the workforce. I really don't. And so can we just bloody well get on with it, please? And so, genuinely, in the next 3 years, we're going to experience 300 years worth of technology innovation. By 2030, 85% of the jobs that will exist don't exist yet. We have never had such a great opportunity in front of us to switch it up. And so that means we all have to get a little bit impatient with the amount of progress we're making, and we all need to up the ante. And that means we all should be tweeting a buttload right now. We should all be really progressing this conversation, so these aren't moments that happen in events and conferences, but it's an ongoing dialogue, and that we continue to maintain and increase the momentum. We've had a really historical couple of years in terms of the women's movement and Me Too and what's been happening, and particularly in US politics and the whole Supreme Court ridiculousness. But the reality is that we can be politely patient, or we can be impolitely impatient. So let's just, start to our head of key accounts, she runs a $1.2 billion business at Telstra, and she says, sometimes you just need to act with anger. And it's not about being angry at people, but it's having that passion and that fire in the belly. And so I hope that there is a Women in Data panel in 5 years' time, because we don't need to talk about it anymore.
Everything she said. So I think it's to change the conversation. And I really appreciated the celebration of women in the introduction to this event, and all of the efforts that, individuals, really the sweat of individuals who are personally passionate. I work with some people who are so passionate and invest so much time and care into making this place better for everyone, and not just women. And I do think that celebrating our accomplishments would really lift my spirit and soul and inspire me and pull me forward. So I'd like to celebrate more.
Oh, I mean, I can just continue echoing all of this brilliance if you would like. I mean, I definitely think that exactly what you're saying about like celebrating and like taking these, I sometimes think that we can be taking these smaller steps inside these communities to tackle the very important questions like the ones that you brought up. And I mean, maybe it can start with, you know, making sure more of our panels are being run by women. Like all the panels I went to today were run by men. Only this Data for Women panel has been a celebration of women. And, you know, why is that, right? So I think those are the kind of questions that I think we can very much tackle in these kinds of conferences because they're directly relevant to this conference. Like, violence against women is obviously very relevant to all of us. But, I mean, we're, like, literally in a conference environment. We can tackle, like, the Venn diagram piece of this issue that falls exactly, you know, right here. And I think that those are the kind of steps that we can really be pushing to tackle now.
I don't know what to say at this point. No, really, everyone has touched on a really great point, and my point would just be around action. I would just hone that in, some type of action, some type of measurable action at that point. I would love for us to take away something that everyone can work on, and then we come back and we have data to support that action that we just did. So I would love for us to like set some type of goal, whether it's opening up more Data Plus Women chapters, whether it's bringing another person to this event next year, something that we can track, something that we can measure so that we can say, hey, we're taking action on this. Action is coming out of these types of events.
So these are phenomenal insights and values that we all can promote. I really love that you concluded with action, Chantilly, thank you. And before we go to Q&A, we'd just like to emphasize the idea of connecting. Probably you're sitting next to a friend. We see a lot of people I know, our close friends, coworkers. Before we go to Q&A, think about the person sitting behind you and whether or not you know that person. That's a potential connection for you and a potential impact that you can make right now on our world. So I'd like to thank our panelists. This has been phenomenal. I don't know if you guys have ever put on a panel like this before, but a tremendous amount of work goes into this. We have been preparing for weeks, and each of these fine members of our community has dedicated hours and hours of their time to sharing their insights with you. I'd love for you to join me in a round of applause for them. Thank you. So we have about 10 minutes for Q&A. After that, we would love for you all to stay around as long as you can and network, get to know each other, the person behind you or in front of you, and our panelists. We do have someone with a microphone. If you would like to ask questions, please do. We would love to hear them. We have quite a few. Great. All right, this gentleman in the blue shirt has a microphone.
Thank you. I don't know if I have to be loud.
Hello. I was wondering if, I'm sure you have, if you've experienced the Good Old Boys Club and how you've navigated that to kind of push past that or to make your way in. Because I've found the difficulty where I work is being one of few women on a team. I can't get in that Good Old Boys Club because I'm single and I can't go golfing with the men or hang out with them outside of work.
Sometimes, first of all, brave question, and you were first, well done, you rock. What I would say is that men don't men are really good at socialising, and there's, again, I go back to that comment I made around there's no bad men and we don't need to fix women. And so I would encourage you to think about how do you take a leading role in creating a socialising event that you design and that you actually recruit some women to help you with that event and actually raise the conversation in a social, relaxed, non-confrontational kind of way, and just go, hey, you know, could we start doing more of this versus less of... It's much more easy to have an additive conversation that is about having fun and spending more time doing fun things than it is to say, I don't like what you do and how you socialise. Because men will still play golf, ride motorbikes, go fishing. It just happens. And so just shift the dynamic by hopping in the driver's seat and creating the opportunity that you want in terms of a social connection with them.
I would like to put in a plug for gender-neutral bathrooms, because all of these boards have all of these men, and they all go to the bathroom together, and I swear there's got to be some advantage there, right? That's marketing 101.
Next question, we've got 10 minutes, let's go.
So how would you deal with other women, actually? Because I've had a case recently where I had another woman manager actually comment about my behavior being too forthcoming to deal with senior level, C-level executives at our company. And so no comment about appropriateness in the workplace, just being too forthcoming. So how, in your experience, do you deal with kind of other women talking to you in that way?
Well, I mean, I think this is, I mean, it really varies, I think, maybe by industry and like by the kind of organization that you're at. I mean, I personally I've worked in those kinds of organizations with, you know, your usual kind of faces in management roles, et cetera. And I consciously looked for an organization that didn't look like that. And I know that that's, you know, not always possible for everyone, and there's certain industries where there's certain organizations you want to be at, so like take it with all the caveats. But you can also, you know, really look for those types of organizations that look like what you want them to. And I think by that same token, it's also really important that we're having these kinds of conversations in forums like this, because women who are in the management roles, I think, need to stop thinking of this as like a zero-sum game, where if one woman comes up, then that's one less spot for me because there's X number of seats on that board, you know, per California. And I think we need to think of it as like, well, you're on the board and I'll run this department. You know, like we need to kind of have this fostering of community, and I think that that's a step that maybe all of us can take.
I find that when you have there's kind of two things. The first is, on that particular instance, I would have had a conversation about trying to understand her intention. Because sometimes feedback, let's be honest, we're not all amazing at giving and receiving feedback. And so the first thing I would encourage you to do is be courageous enough to go back and have a curious conversation, which was, what was your intention? I've been reflecting on that feedback you gave me. Thank you for that gift, but I'm struggling to understand the intention. So could you help me understand what was your intention in giving me that feedback? And because it's one of two things. She's either just not that into you, and that's okay, because you have the relationship with your boss you deserve, by the way. For all of those that hate their boss, we'll work on changing that. So that's data in itself. So it's still going to be a gift either way. It's like, okay, I need to look for someone else that inspires me and go find a role working for someone else. Or their intention genuinely was, you had a moment that was polarising. And the words she used maybe weren't helpful, but she was trying to give you a gift about how do you develop other aspects of your delivery, because sometimes full frontal is not helpful in all conversations, and you need to have kind of highs and lows and a mixed way of delivering so that you kind of got a really full toolkit of skills when you go into certain situations. And so check with their intention and then see where the conversation goes from there.
I have to add that if you do go back and with curious compassion ask to learn more about the situation there, I am almost totally certain that she will learn something about herself, and that's a gift. And I think sometimes I avoid, maybe having those sort of confrontational feeling moments because I am terrified of confrontation. But normally something great happens out of it.
So I don't really have a question as much as just something to think about. Is I want to make what I would like to see as the conversation about women in data and in the world in general is that we also kind of figure out how to make sure we're teaching our boys and the men what their role is, because I also don't want my son to be coming to meetings like this or going into the workforce and having to either fight for women to get to the same place or also to fight for himself. So as much as we speak up and we say that we need to speak up for ourselves, I think boys need to speak up. Men need to understand how they're improved when women rise up. I think they have to understand that the issues that affect women also affect them, whether it's politically birth control or abortion or more than that. But also, more importantly, letting our boys be who they are, because they're also taught to be something and forced to be something and put in boxes, and I think that's really detrimental. And I think we need to improve our working environment so that men can have paternity leave, can be home with their families, do flex time, because that benefits everyone. And we can sit there and we can say it, how do we improve women? We got to make it all across the board, and everybody needs to speak up.
Hi, this is mostly directed to Chantilly. You mentioned age and appearing young, and this is something that I've noticed impacts me more than some of the men I've worked with. So how do you handle appearing young or being young, and how do you kind of make yourself be taken more seriously, maybe, if you have a very authentic and goofy personality?
Great question. One, I always go back to being authentic, and then two, I let my work speak for itself. I would say every other month, or probably every month at my job, I'm asked if I'm even 18 years old. It's crazy, the bubbles that they put me in sometimes at work. Somebody asked me if I was 13, older than 13 one day. I always start my sessions by saying I'm old enough to drink. All right, so if you want to have a drink with me afterwards, hit me up. But I always let my work speak for me. So I went through an organizational change earlier this year, and I realized that my new manager didn't really know who I was, and my age was an issue with us. But once she saw that my work started speaking for me, she let me have like more direction in the conversation, more drive. So I would go back to, sometimes you have to work a little bit harder in that sense, but if your work reflects what you know, who cares about your age at that point? So definitely just let your work speak for you, be your authentic self, and use the millennial status to your advantage.
One last question.
So this isn't really a fully formed thought, but not every woman is on the page of building every woman up. And so when you find yourself in a situation, particularly, I've known women to be threatened by up and coming women, and to not, they may have broken the glass ceiling, but the shards are coming down, I guess is the best analogy. And so how to have those compassionate conversations, particularly when they ignite a certain anger within you, how can you, what is your best guidance when you're dealing with a woman that you know is threatened and that it may be in a place of power over you? Because it happens.
So before I worked with data, I was a massage therapist working with stress and post-traumatic stress. And there's a way we can see the body as a connection for me is we've got between 600 and 800 muscles in the body, depending on who's counting. So helping somebody with their shoulder problem, it's kind of like a big multivariable solution or problem to solve. So one of the things, so I'm going to use some of my knowledge from that to answer your question. So one of the ways we can look at it is we've got this person they're stressed out, their nervous system is activated, they're feeling threatened, they're in a fight or flight, a survival kind of mode, and their reaction to it, instead of lifting you up, is to push you down. So they're in this control space. So what do we do when there's an animal or a child that's really stressed out? We create a safe space for them and everything. And that's the thing we have to learn how to do, is how can we have that safety with that other person, which also means we have to be safe and okay in ourselves in that moment and know our own reactivity and do the personal work to get over it. So one of the things that happened in the civil rights movement to bring that, a whole chunk of it was in the 50s and 60s, which was also a time they very purposely did consciousness raising there. So that way somebody could sit there and be nonviolent when the cops were attacking them with bulldogs or whatever. So in the same way for us, when we want to be in that space, we've got to be that bigger person who can hold the other person's rage and anger and fear and be with whatever own we're feeling too. Like, who the hell are you to be telling me this right now? I'm trying to do the best thing for the organization or something like that. We have to be able to still that reaction in us and receive them in that moment, and like you were saying earlier, be able to get to that place of curiosity. Because we're not going to be curious about what is it for them in that moment that they're trying to push us down if we're being threatened ourselves. Because curiosity and stress tend to be a little bit inverse in that way, in that survival reflex. So that takes reading, meditation, prayer, holding prayer beads. I don't know what's going to work for you or anybody else in that moment, but it does take that effort to find that out.
I was going to say the same thing. She probably needed a gin and tonic or sleep or both. What I would say is every senior woman I work for and have worked with, I've never had that barracuda in the boardroom experience. I have met people that are highly stressed. And so when I hear you speak, I just immediately feel absolute compassion for whoever you were running into. And so it's that inverse reaction. So you kind of want to put a guard up and be like, oh, she was a bitch. And in that moment, I really encourage you to catch your inner queen and just be like, I'm going to lift this woman up. She doesn't know she needs to be lifted back up right now, but she does. And that's how you need to look out for each other. So I encourage you, when you have that gut reaction of, this woman's not into me, or, she was cold, she's pushing me down, she's competitive, she's bossy, she's this, she's that. That's the moment your inner queen's got to come out, and you've got to be generous, even though your gut reaction is to not be so. And on the flip side, you will make an amazing friend who is in a senior leadership position, who is great at giving you career advice, and she'll remember that you were generous, and that she probably wasn't so nice in your first interaction.
So we're now going to conclude the Q&A. We welcome everyone to stay for networking, and really appreciate everyone coming here and contributing to a phenomenal conversation. Thank you all so much.